I was a teenager in the 1990s, the heyday of the infomercial. I used to love staying up late, when it wasn't a school night, of course, and watching the likes of Ron Popeil, Mike Levy, John Parkin, Kathy Mitchell, Marshall Silver, Kevin Trudeau, Don Lapre, and countless others try to sell me stuff I didn't need and in many cases didn't even work, as evidenced by the fact that Kevin Trudeau and Don Lapre both eventually went to prison for fraud. Well, technically only Kevin Trudeau actually went to prison. Don Lapre probably would have too, but after he was arrested in 2011 on a few dozen charges of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, he committed suicide by cutting his own throat. Sorry to get so gruesome right at the beginning, but it does kind of fit the subject. See, there were all different kinds of infomercials back in the day. Some tried to be funny, some tried to be serious, some pretended to be talk shows or cooking shows or lifestyle shows. There was even an infomercial for Dianetics that pretended L. Ron Hubbard had the slightest idea what he was talking about. But then there was this one infomercial that didn't want to do any of those things. This infomercial wanted to convince you that if you didn't buy the product it was selling, you might about it, you probably would get raped or murdered. This infomercial was for a product called the Pulse Wave Myotron. And what this infomercial wanted to do was scare the shit out of you. It takes the form of a true crime reality show combining interviews, a panel discussion, and dramatic reenactments into something that often feels like the most lurid and alarmist episode of Rescue 911 ever made. It begins with the scene of a woman being stalked in a parking garage while the narrator lists scary-sounding violent crime statistics and reminds us that you can't tell who your attacker is going to be just by looking at them. The guy about to assault this woman is wearing slacks and a tie, for God's sake. A tie! But then, just as the stalker is about to attack, the woman zaps him with something that makes a sound like a ray gun from a Saturday morning cartoon. He immediately collapses to the floor with a groan, and she pulls out a 20-pound cell phone and calls the cops. In steps Linda Watkins, the narrator and host, to inform us that the device the woman used to non-violently subdue her attacker is called a Myotron, which allows you to protect yourself using the power of pulse wave technology. But before we learn what that is, and more importantly, how we can buy one, we get a montage of some more scary crime scenarios, including woman gets pulled into alley and menaced by gang of bodybuilders. Woman gets her money snatched at an ATM. Woman changes a tire. Flower delivery guy forces his way into apartment. Creepy guy spies on an all-girls study group. Girl slaps away hand of date rapist. Someone steals your first-grade teacher's purse. Creepy guy spies on aerobics class. Guy drags woman away from car. Gang attacks nerd on public transportation. Girl on bicycle abducted by person in van. Creepy guy spies on woman getting undressed. Bikers threaten retirees sitting on a bench. Guy hides in back seat of flight attendant's car. Someone stops someone else from beating the shit out of a kid. Woman gets dragged into woods. Woman gets dragged into same van that abducted the girl on the bike a minute ago. Then we get some blue lights evocative of police flashers while we hear audio dramatizing panic 911 calls dissolve through shots of a scary serial killer face, a woman dying in an emergency room, a black screen with the ominous audio of a dial tone, then a super close-up of this sobbing woman who does not look like she's having a good day that dissolves to the title, Crime in America. Subtitle, Are you safe? Well, I mean, if the answer was yes, they would hardly have gone to all this trouble, one would think. Before I go on, I just want to emphasize how genuinely unsettling this was to watch back in the day. When this infomercial originally aired, I was a kid. Watching it now, it's hilarious and all its manipulative tricks are obvious and trite. But back then, up late on a Friday or a Saturday night, in bed with the TV on, everyone else asleep, in a dark, quiet house, let's just say it hit different. After the main title sequence, or whatever that was, fades out, we fade in on Linda, who is about to conduct an interview and introduces her guest like this.
She was shopping. He followed her home. The rest is history. And her children are now orphans. The question, how do we protect ourselves? We're here with career criminologist Janice Daisy, looking for some answers. Janice, you investigated this case. Was this woman in the wrong place at the wrong time, or what?
Hang on, if I could just interrupt for a second, because I have another question. What case? Who was shopping? Who followed her home? What happened? When did this happen? Where? I realize it's late and you're just trying to frighten me into picking up the phone and giving you my credit card number, but a few details wouldn't hurt. Maybe Janice has some specifics.
With this nation's crime rate, the wrong place at the wrong time could be anywhere at any time. In this case, she was shopping. He followed her home.
We know, Janice. We covered that already.
He broke in. She then sprayed him with an aerosol.
And it didn't work?
Obviously not.
Janice goes on to list some of the potential problems with such an aerosol weapon, like how mechanical failures can lead to loss of pressure, or how it's less effective on a windy day, or against someone wearing glasses, or against someone who puts their hand up, or against someone who moves. All excellent points. The shot cuts back to Linda, who is definitely in the same room talking to Janice in real time, who asks how this nameless attacker got into this nameless woman's house in the first place. The answer? Right through the front door. Then Janice, the interviewee, throws to a clip. The clip, or clips actually, illustrate how easy it is for someone to get into your house by crowbarring the door open or sneaking in under the garage door before it closes. Pepper spray won't help you. Deadbolts won't help you. Even the mighty automatic garage door is no match for murderous home invaders.
So, Janice, what's the answer?
It's sitting right in front of you. My opinion? Pulse wave technology.
Oh, but we don't get to find out what pulse wave technology is yet, or what that wireless mouse on Janice's desk has to do with it, because first, we need to hear more about the out-of-control crime wave that will inevitably make victims of us all. Linda transitions out of her interview with Janice, which definitely took place in an actual office that they were both in at the same time, to a panel discussion which includes Lauren Cox, gang rape survivor, Sharon Comlos, who was abducted, shot in the head, and blinded, raped, stabbed, and left for dead. I'm watching this as a teenager, all alone, surrounded by silence and darkness. David Eaton, former president of Colt Firearms, who is apparently here to tell us not to buy a gun. You have my attention. Pam Garrett, self-defense instructor, who is apparently here to tell us that self-defense classes are bullshit. Boy, this infomercial must have paid pretty well, huh? Linda starts with David, which is only proper. Let the old white guy who used to run the gun company speak before the two women who are rape survivors. She picks up a six-shooter like it's got cooties and passes it to him while asking him why he's not in favor of women carrying guns. And Eaton says,
yes, it is true that I'm not an advocate of guns in a situation such as we're talking about. I've never believed that guns were an adequate and acceptable method for self-defense. They breed violence. The presence of a gun accentuates the possibility for violence.
I'm sorry, what?
I've never believed that guns were an adequate and acceptable method for self-defense. They breed violence. The presence of a gun accentuates the possibility for violence.
And who is this guy again?
Mr. David Eaton, past president of the legendary Colt Firearms.
And what's that he just said about guns?
They breed violence. The presence of a gun accentuates the possibility for violence.
The dark, quiet house where teenage me is watching this has a whole bunch of guns in it, by the way.
Why do you say guns tend to promote violence?
Because whenever you display anything that resembles a weapon, you force the other person to make a decision. That decision is either to retreat or become more aggressive. But you force that decision. you've challenged him, and in doing that, you dramatically increase the potential for violence.
Seriously, how many of these things did they think they were going to sell? Because the producers of this infomercial had to be putting some serious fucking coin in this guy's pocket to get him to say such sensible things about guns, didn't they? I mean, dude was in the gun business, so presumably he didn't have much integrity to begin with. Maybe he gave him a discount, but still. We leave the panel discussion for the moment so that Linda can interview another expert who is finally going to tell us what pulse wave technology is, what a Myotron does, and why it's better than a gun. Linda starts out by emphasizing that the Myotron doesn't look like a weapon. It looks like something you would just have with you, maybe attached to your keys. Sure, most people would just assume it's one of those cordless electric razor keychains that were so popular in the 90s. Linda also tells us that while the Myotron is non-lethal,
They say it's amazingly effective.
who's they? The people who manufactured it and are selling it to you right now through this infomercial. Linda turns to her guest, Russell Wilson, a neurologist, who offers a medically sound and scientifically accurate explanation of how pulse wave technology works.
Well, simply stated, hostility originates in the hypothalamic region of the brain, and our voluntary muscles are controlled by electrical impulses originating in the autonomic region of the brain. When you touch someone with a myotron, the electronic pulse waves interrupt or block these signals.
So it intercepts the brain waves and scrambles the nervous system.
Basically, yes.
Dr. Wilson goes on to assure us that a person who has been stunned by a Myotron will collapse and remain passive for 30 minutes or perhaps even several hours, depending on the length of contact with the Myotron, but that the device is absolutely non-lethal and recovery is complete with no after effects. Watching this way back when, I was skeptical of this claim, complete recovery with no after effects, but it turns out that's true. I'll explain why later. First, Linda says, let's watch this amazing instrument in action. And then we get a charming scene of a woman being assaulted in her bed by an intruder who presumably either crowbarred through her deadbolt or snuck in under the garage door. The attacker puts his hand over her mouth and starts pulling up her nightgown, but luckily she's got her trusty Myotron on the side table. She zaps him, he immediately rolls off of her, and she calmly gets out of bed and walks away like you do. Linda interviews Pam Garrett, the Amazonian martial arts instructor who has been paid to say that karate ain't shit, and that's why she carries a Myotron, which works every time. She shows us how to use the Myotron. You just slide back the safety switch, push the hidden button, and the pulse waves are released through the two little electrodes at the front. And it also makes that cartoon sound again, which doesn't undermine the credibility of the presentation whatsoever. Then, after a testimonial from a guy and his silent wife about how great the Myotron is, did you know it also comes in black? We hear from a retired FBI agent. His name is Bert Stickler, and he says that crime in America is out of control, that law enforcement cannot hope to contain it, and that your only hope is to look after yourself, and you should do that by getting a Myotron, which was originally designed for use by law enforcement so you know it's manufactured to meet the highest standards. Why wasn't it ever widely in use by law enforcement? Stop asking questions and buy one before you get murdered. Can't you see that Bert Stickler is trying to help you? After that, it's time for another scene of the Myotron in action. And ooh, it's the extended cut of the bikers threaten retirees sitting on a bench shot from earlier. I hope this version has more backstory and world building.
You old people sit on my bench, you're gonna have to pay.
Right.
We don't want any trouble.
Yeah, y'all run along and play. You hear this old man? What's this jive he's talking? Run along and play. You better give me your wallet, mister, or I'm gonna rearrange your head.
Oh, I didn't realize you were such tough guys.
Okay, here's the wallet.
Yeah, you might as well take my car keys, too.
And that's how the infamous Sin City Motorcycle Club park bench protection racket was busted up forever by one brave grandpa and a pulse wave Myotron. You have any idea how hard it was to find a multiracial biker gang to reference for that gag? I'm just saying. Next, it's time for Sharon Komlos to tell her story. And look, she's the real deal. You can find newspaper articles from 30 and 40 years ago online about what happened to her. She wrote a book about it. In 1980, she really was shot in the head, which rendered her permanently blind, abducted, repeatedly raped and stabbed, and only managed to escape because her attacker left her alone long enough for her to crawl out onto a balcony and scream for help. She survived. She was able to give the cops information about her assailant that allowed them to find him and put him in prison with a 104-year sentence, and she put her life back together, and good for her. Sharon relates part of what happened to her in the infomercial, but I got some of the additional details from this article in the Deseret News of Salt Lake City, Utah, dated May 1st, 1990. The article also helpfully notes that Sharon was in town, quote, to convince investors to help finance a new device that protects women from assailants. Go on. The device, called a Myotron, sends a high-voltage, low-amperage electrical charge into an assailant, which scrambles his nervous impulses, knocking him unconscious long enough for a woman to flee and call police. The device, however, does not kill. So she was an investor? Or at least hired to attract investors? And this was 1990, at least a few years before the infomercial started airing. Does that make using her story to sell this thing less repulsive? Time for another demonstration! The Myotron can save you from being sexually harassed by scumbags in elevators while Seinfeld music plays. Just jam it right into the guy's dick. Problem solved! You can even drop an empowering one-liner on your way out.
What happened to him?
Oh, just a little attitude adjustment concerning women.
Ha ha! You go, girl. But some of you might be saying, sure, it's effective against unwanted love in an elevator, but does it work on serial killers? Let's see.
You okay?
Oh, I'm so embarrassed.
Here, let me help.
Thank you. I guess I should have asked my wife to come along and help. This is my van. Get in.
This is a Myotron, and this is a badge, and you are under arrest.
Told us a little story there, didn't they? And it really makes you think, too, doesn't it? If only the victims of Ted Bundy had Myotrons attached to their keys. Or had been cops. Who's up for a completely spontaneous, not at all scripted Q&A with our panel and the studio audience? First up is this lady who asks former Colt Firearms President David Eaton why he thinks the Myotron is so awesome. Check out Eaton's convincingly off-the-cuff response.
First, it's small size and convenience. Attach your keys to it, and you automatically have it with you. Second, it's disguised. It doesn't look like a weapon, so there's no threat of violence. Unlike a gun, you don't have to practice with it. Third, it's highly effective, but not lethal. And I do agree with Sharon. I believe this technology, these products, will change the way people, particularly women, think and function in today's society.
Concise, specific, and definitely not read off of a cue card. Next question.
Janice, my husband said that the Myotron is a small stun gun. Is that true?
No, the Myotron is not a stun gun. That's like comparing a typewriter to a computer. The Myotron is light years away from a stun gun.
I don't want to spoil the ending of the video, but it's not actually light years away from a stun gun. Dr. Russell, man of science, fields a question about safety and assures everyone that the Myotron is perfectly fine to have around children, only affects voluntary muscles, and poses no risk to people with heart conditions or pacemakers. This guy asks about the Myotron's power source and how many times you can use it, and for some reason, David Eaton takes that question and says that it's powered by a lithium battery, can be used up to 250 times and works through up to half an inch of clothing. This lady wants to know if you'll feel it yourself if you zap someone with the Myotron while they're choking you. Pamela Garrett says, nope, you won't feel a thing, but he will. Big time. And everyone chuckles at her no-nonsense attitude. This other lady wants to know if the Myotron works on people who are on drugs. Janice says that yes, it does, and it also works on people regardless of how big or strong they are. Okay, sales pitch time. Did you know that statistics show that you or someone in your family has a 93% chance of becoming the victim of a violent crime? What statistics? Never mind that. Do you want to die? If not, you'd better get on the phone and buy one of these things. The Myotron can be yours for only 5 easy payments of $39.99.
But do it now, for tomorrow may be too late.
Don't do it now. It's too late. Actually, I tried to find a Myotron online since I thought it would be cool to have one for the video, but no luck. Actually, that's not completely true. I did find this one on eBay for $400. However, I felt like paying twice the original price for a 30-year-old stun gun would not be a wise purchase, so I passed. Does it feel like it's been a while since we had a sensationalist reenactment? Here's Janice to share with us the story of Ariane and Alexia, 2 sisters who were out shopping for Alexia's wedding. On the way home, they got a flat tire. Being women, they were unable to even attempt to change the flat themselves, so they just sat in the car for an unspecified length of time, but it must have been hours because it's obviously the middle of the day when they first noticed the flat, and it's dark when this truck finally pulls up in front of them. Out of the truck tumble Bubba and Monroe. I know those are their names because they constantly use them to refer to each other. And look, I don't like to jump to conclusions about people, but I think that Bubba and Monroe may have been drinking. Ariane and Alexia lock the doors and are impervious to the charms of their 2 would-be suitors, so clever Monroe grabs a humongous rock that just happens to be right there at his feet and uses it to smash in the window on the passenger side. This somehow allows Bubba to open the driver's side door as well, and they yank the ladies out and drag them screaming into the woods. Since that night, Janice's narration tells us, Alexia has been in a mental institution where she sits all day staring at a wall, silently reliving the horrors she experienced. Her sister Ariane died, as evidenced by this obviously real tombstone that we see being visited by her kids, I guess, and her mom. As they walk off through the cemetery, Linda takes over the narration to inform us that in the last half hour since this, as she calls it, documentary began, over 2,400 crimes have been committed, including 1,000 acts of violence, 100 women being raped, and 30 people dying violent deaths. Then, we get one final testimonial from this lady who says, I was stalked and nearly assaulted and murdered by a big drugged-out guy with a knife, but luckily, I had recently purchased a Myotron, so I zapped him with it and he dropped like a sack of shit. If you don't want to get butchered like a hog, get you one of these. And that's it. Teenage me is under the covers, eyes nervously scanning the darkness just beyond the glow of the TV set, trying to summon the nerve to get up and go to the bathroom. But grown-up me is delighted by the unintentional hilarity of it all, and also disgusted with what scumbags these people are. And I don't merely call them scumbags because they produced a fear-mongering infomercial to sell their product to frighten people. I call them scumbags because, and please make sure you're sitting down before I hit you with this stunning climactic reveal, their product didn't work. I guess he wasn't a stickler for the facts. Okay, technically it worked. It did something, just not what the infomercial said it did. I conducted some research, and yes, I am using research in the modern sense of the term, meaning I spent a couple of minutes browsing Google results, and found this summer 1998 issue of TechBeat, a publication put out by the National Law Enforcement and Corrections Technology Center, which includes a brief summary of a product test conducted on the Myotron by Sandia National Laboratories, which found, quote, several discrepancies between the manufacturer's claims and the test results. Those discrepancies: the manufacturer states that the Myotron Checkmate, it's only actually mentioned once in the infomercial, but Checkmate is the model name of the Myotron device being sold. Anyway, the manufacturer states that the Myotron Checkmate is more than 10 times as powerful as the average stun gun, although testing of a purchased model revealed that the product has one of the highest electrical outputs for stun guns. It is not more than 10 times the power of the average stun gun. And the manufacturer claims that the device can deliver more than 10,000 bursts from the power pack, but testing indicates that 4,000 bursts are more likely. The 10,000 bursts thing wasn't mentioned in the infomercial. David Eaton said it can be used up to 250 times, but what would he know about it anyway? He's the former president of a gun manufacturer who was just there collecting a check. I told you it was weird that he answered that question. They should have given that one to Dr. Russell Wilson, neurologist and avatar of scientific accuracy. The manufacturer reports that the device, quote, intercepts and neutralizes brain waves from the motor cortex, voluntary muscle control, and hypothalamic aggression regions of the brain, which produces no side effects. Although neither animal nor human subject testing was conducted, testing did consist of an electrical engineering evaluation, a general evaluation by industrial hygiene/toxicology personnel, and an overall high-level systems analysis by Sandia National Laboratories. Results indicate no evidence to support this claim. You mean Russell Wilson's explanation of what the Myotron does and how it works was bullshit? But he had an animated illustration and everything. In addition to the product test reported in TechBeat, I also found this YouTube video posted about 10 years ago by a guy who bought a Myotron back in the day. He demonstrates it. Here's the actual sound it makes. Compare that to... yeah, I mean, it's pretty close. The guy in the video also casts some doubt on the claim that the charge from the Myotron is able to penetrate half an inch of clothing and basically describes it as a conventional stun gun. It packs a wallop. This doofus claims he zapped himself with it back in the day when he first got it and it knocked him on his ass, but he says nothing about remaining incapacitated for half an hour afterwards. I found a couple other testimonials from people who say it hurts, which I believe, but the whole intercepting brainwaves and scrambling the nervous system rap doesn't seem to be remotely true, which may be why the manufacturers thought producing a late-night infomercial to scare the piss out of people and convince them they were 10 seconds away from being raped and murdered at any given moment was the best way to market the thing. And while I can't say I'm sorry that the Myotron didn't work as advertised, I don't see how making a device capable of actually scrambling the human nervous system available to anyone with a credit card would have been a sensible thing to do. I can say that I think it's pretty appalling that the manufacturers of the Myotron used fear of violent crime, and in particular, violent crime against women, to urge people to spend $200 on a product that did not do what they promised it did. It's bad enough they made an infomercial so disturbing it made it hard for adolescent me to get to sleep when it was over, but to know they did it so dishonestly? Very disappointing. I mean, if you can't even trust the claims made in paid programming, what can you trust? Anyway, it's late. Thanks for watching. Good night. Did you hear that? Was that you? I wonder if that eBay listing is still up. $400 isn't all that much, is it?